we knew he was a liar, a pathological liar, but we didn't know how far it was. So he would take, like that guru that you showed, Jose. Yeah, that's him. That guru you showed, he would take gurus like Maharaj. Well, he would take Ramana Maharshi and Ananda Moyama and all these really big wigs who had written books. And he would go in the morning and he would read all of this stuff and pick out these sentences and create a script. And then he would literally rehearse these scripts for his satsang that night, as though it was coming right off of his enlightened brain. Wow. That's what a freaking fraud he was, right?
Las distracciones y narrativas reinan este mundo tecnológico. Todos tienen una opinión de lo que es la verdad y lo que es mentira. ¿Quién controla el mundo? ¿Los aliens son real? ¿Vivimos en un Matrix? Estas preguntas serán debatidas con José y Daniel G, explorando y descubriendo las verdades de nuestro mundo, nuestras creencias y nuestro reality. Welcome to Cultura Truth Project. Dímelo, mi gente. Welcome back. Otro episodio de Cultura Truth Project. Aquí está José G. Está Daniel G. What's up, bro?
Bro. Oh my God. There's so much happening in the world, and I think we got the perfect guest for today. But before we get started, I want to give my shout out to all my people in Tennessee, my people in California, all my people in the UK.
Listeners from, Danny?
Bro, we got listeners from the UK. We got listeners from Brazil. Bro, we got listeners all over the world. Hey, I am excited.
Love it.
To see it grow, not only on the YouTube, but on all the audio platforms. Thank you guys so much for listening. Que es la que hay, mi gente? Obrigado to all my peoples out in Brazil. Guys, it's about to go down.
Mira, mi gente, I just want to say big shout out to our guests from last week. We had a big episode. We had Donut Factory, Paranoid American on the show. We absolutely killed it. So thank you to all the brand new subscribers on the YouTube, to all the brand new subscribers on Spotify, on all the podcast platforms. Thank you so much. But Danny, before we start the show, let me plug in and just so we could talk about your guest, because you brought some fire to the show today, bro.
Man, okay. So simply enough, man, this is one of the best human beings I've ever met in my life. I love this lady, but she has a story that only she can tell. Radhia Gleis, go ahead and pull her socials up real quick for me, Jose.
Yeah.
Radhia Gleis is a certified nutritionist, dietitian, a bunch of titles, but more than anything, she was part of a cult.
No way.
She was part of a cult, and that cult has a documentary called Holy Hell, and she wrote a book about it.
I think I've seen that. Wasn't that like on CNN a few years ago?
Yes.
Okay.
Called Holy Hell, and she was one of the main members of this cult, and she can tell you all about it. The story is going to leave you jaw-dropping, so without any further ado, I'd like to bring in my good friend, Radhia Gleis. Welcome, Radhia, to the Cultura Truth Project. Thank you so much. How are you?
Hi, guys.
Hi.
Hi, Daniel.
Hi, how you doing? How you been?
Welcome to the show, Radhia.
Well, thank you, Jose. Nice to see you. Nice to see you both. Happy to be here.
Yeah.
Amazing, guys. And before we get started with the interview, make sure you follow on all of our platforms, guys, on Rumble, on YouTube, at Cultura Truth Project, at Gonzalez Media on Facebook, and on Instagram, Gonzalez Media TV. And make sure you subscribe to the podcast on all major platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, and leave us a 5-star review. Do it. Leave that 5-star review.
Thank
So
you for
Danny,
the housekeeping,
tell
Jose.
me a little bit about Radhia. How do you guys know each other? Because
So Radhia and I
Daniel
used to
talks
work
really
together.
high about you.
Radhia and I used to work together, and it's
Yeah.
funny because we worked together selling drugs legally, obviously.
Oh, that's right, pharmaceuticals.
Well, you sold the drugs. I sold the nutritional part.
Right. So we used to work together, and after a while of working, you'd start having conversations. And I discovered she was like, I wrote a book. I'm like, oh, you wrote a book? I read her book, and I came back the next day, and I was like, you were in what? And in what?
What?
And bro, I'm gonna tell you this. I can't do it justice. I've read the book multiple times just because it's so insane. But Radhia, just start in the beginning. How did you get involved in a cult? How does someone even join a cult? And how did you end up writing the book? I guess that journey, to writing the followers, and then we can get into the details of everything else.
All right. Well, first of all, nobody joins a cult. You don't wake up one day and say, I think I'm going to join a cult. Honey, get the kids. I'll get the Kool-Aid. We're off to Guyana. It's just like you don't join a cult. You don't even know you're in a cult until you finally look around and go, is this a cult? And it took us 20 some odd years before, that happened. And cults sneak up on you. But of course, there's a lot of cults. There's a lot of different cults. They all have different things going on, different forms of groupthink. But they're usually led by a narcissist. And, they usually start out really sweet. They start out, like me. I grew up, I'm an old dog, guys. I'm old as dirt. And I grew up in LA in the 50s and 60s. I was in the height of so many revolutions, our head was spinning, so many cultural revolutions, the civil rights and gay rights and women's rights, and everybody was up in upheaval. We were anti-Vietnam War, blah, blah, blah. So all of that was happening culturally. And those kinds of cultural upheavals were mostly happening in the big cities, in Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, whatever. And so as I was growing up, I was involved in a lot of those movements. And I think most of us, especially at that time, now we're getting a revival in this generation right now. But it's kind of like a deja vu I'm getting. It's like, let me tell you guys, it's, everything that you're doing right now in the streets and, protesting and all of that, been there, done that. And we've had about a 40-year hiatus. And now it's just gotten batshit crazy again. So here we are. So at the time when I was in Los Angeles, let's face it, there was a cult on every block. You had your Scientologists and your Moonies and your Hare Krishnas, and all these movements were happening. And young people like me at the time were looking to sort of step out of the mediocre, leave it to Beaver kind of reality, especially being a female, being educated. And I also grew up in a very affluent, I grew up in Brentwood, that's where.
Brentwood?
I know where Brentwood is.
Some of you folks.
We know where Brentwood is.
Exactly where I'm talking about, right?
Oh, yeah. I used to have clients in Brentwood.
Yes. Okay. So you know what that is. Well, there's an element of pretentiousness, an element of superficiality. Mm-hmm. And so I and my friends were looking for something deeper. At that time, also, a lot of sort of Eastern philosophy, Eastern religions were moving into the United States, especially on the West Coast. So you had these movements that were influenced by music. The Beatles brought Maharaji, and Maharishi, and all these, influences of the hippies at that time were exploring that, and a lot of psychedelics. We were exploring a lot of new perspectives. And so, I consider myself, people say to me, I've been interviewed all over the world, and people go, if they've read my book, they go, wow, Radhia, you're so intelligent. And what they're really saying is, wow, Radhia, I was really expecting a gullible fool, right? An idiot. And I always say to them, do you really think that the lawyers and the millionaires that were duped by Bernie Madoff were stupid or uneducated? It doesn't have anything to do with that. It has to do with, there's a marriage between a narcissist and its followers. And a narcissist figures out what you want, and then they will do anything. Usually they're pathological liars, and they will do anything to trick you into thinking that they have what you want. Right? So for me, growing up as a Catholic, even though I left Catholicism at the age of reason, which to the Catholics is the age of 7, it was not reasonable to me. But I was really enamored with the stories of the saints. I was really into that. And I was enamored with all of these sort of enlightened beings, whether it's Jesus or Buddha or any of them, that apparently, and the saints were the first sort of exposure of this sort of transcendental experience where they could transcend the mind and the body, right? So, I looked for a long time. And I went to Catholic school, and it was my freshman year. To the school's credit, they were giving comparative religions. And so, the teacher was droning on about Hinduism and Buddhism and all of these other isms. And it came across a word, nirvana. And I said, what does this word nirvana mean? And he said, well, some yogis in India experience God directly. Next question. And I'm like, wait, say that again. And so I said, is that true? And he said, well, apparently, And so I was like, and you're here for what? So from the time I was about 14, I went on this journey. And I was looking for nirvana, and I was looking for whatever the meditation techniques that these yogis were doing. I want in, right? And that's how it happened. So that's what I and people in my group were basically looking for. They were looking for, as we started to see all of these Indian saints coming into the Western culture. In Los Angeles, Paramahansa Yogananda has two huge centers in Los Angeles. So Yogananda brought a lot of these kinds of things, and Ramana Maharshi and Father Murti and all of these, other kinds of spiritual teachers that were teaching about these very cool enlightened states. So it's a long story. You got to read my book. But the reason why my book is divided into 3 sections. So the first section is about me. And I wanted about me growing up in Brentwood and growing up with very powerful parents. My father was one of the 12 super lawyers in LA. My mother was a fashion designer. They were very powerful, but also very, I hate to say it, they were very narcissistic and superficial. And I even though, I was a debutante and all of that, I was really not into any of that. So when I started exploring this and reading about it and trying to find this group or that, I couldn't find anybody. I couldn't find anybody who said, I experienced God directly. They talk about, there's a saint in India who 100 years ago was experiencing this. That's Autobiography of a Yogi. Or there's, this guy. But there was never anybody who could look me in the eye and say, I experienced God directly. So it's a long journey. A lot of psychedelics in between, a lot of exploring, right, until I got into my mid to late 20s. And I was an artist. I was a graphic artist. I had graduated from Art Center College of Design. That's in LA or in Pasadena. And I was working for Disney, and I was doing all this stuff. And I met this woman I started working for her as her art director, and she took me to Florida. And there in Florida, I was meeting different people, and one person said, "Oh, you've got to meet this person. She experienced God directly." So I'm like, "I'm in. Let me experience. Let me go see her." So I go see her, and it's like, it was so hippie-esque. Everyone's sitting around like, "Oh wow, man, it's so beautiful."
Yeah.
All this language, and I'm like, okay, get to the point. Like, what's the oh wow factor here? So she started telling this story of these particular experiences in these meditation techniques that were actually taken by Maharaji. Maharaji was big in Florida, and he had premies and all that other stuff. So she was a disciple of his, and long story short, I ended up being with her for a few years, and I moved back to LA, and I missed it. I missed the meditation, whatever. She turned me on to a friend of hers, and that was the teacher. Now, in the beginning, there was like four of us. It's like he had the techniques and would talk about it and whatever, but he was no guru, he was no teacher. And then it happened organically. 4 people bring 8 people, and 8 people bring 16 people, and 16 people bring 32 people, and so forth and so on. And so it's like we weren't recruiting, right? We were.
Is that him, Radhia?
Yeah. That's Maharaj. Yeah. That's Maharaji. No, it would be J.I. That's Maharashi. That's the guy that would be TM. But, similar, same kind of guy, different techniques. But anyway, these magic techniques of the light, the music, the nectar, and the word. And so we were all vying for those techniques. So this guy, his real name is Jaime Gomez, but of course, that's not what he wanted. Obviously, that's not a real good guru name. So when he came to LA, he came from Venezuela. He really wanted to be an actor in Hollywood. He was awful. He was dreadful. And he had this very weird, it wasn't a Spanish accent. It was a combination of, I don't know what he was trying to be. But anyway, he had this kind of weird thing, and it never went big in Hollywood. But being the narcissist that he was, he created his own audience. And so I didn't come to find out what a fraud this guy was until I started doing research for this book 30 years later. And when I discovered, we knew he was a liar, a pathological liar, but we didn't know how far it was. So he would take, like that guru that you showed, Jose. Yeah, that's him. That guru you showed, he would take gurus like Maharaj. Well, he would take Ramana Maharshi and Anandamoya Ma and all these really big wigs who had written books. And he would go in the morning and he would read all of this stuff and pick out these sentences and create a script. And then he would literally rehearse these scripts for his satsang that night, as though it was coming right off of his enlightened brain. Wow. That's what a freaking fraud he was, right? But it sure sounded good, right?
It would be a Hispanic guy trying to, scam white people out of their money. It would be a Hispanic guy. Jesus.
He should have ran for Congress, right?
Oh my God, Ted
He's
Cruz.
right up there with George Santos, for God's sake.
Exactly. I mean, he was the George Santos of the 80s. He really was.
Holy shit.
Such a fraud. And he had so many names. Like I say in my book, I start out where, okay, when I knew him, he was Michel Rostand. It's a long story why we had to flee from Los Angeles and end up in Austin. But when we fled, he went from Michel Rostand to Andreas. And that's who his name was for a long time. And as a matter of fact, I'm the one that gave him that name. Then he went and he was trying to be now we come to Texas. And like 6 months later, Waco is happening. So he's fantasizing that that's going to happen to us, right? So now he's got to change his name again. So he changed it to so many freaking names. Literally, he changed it to Dorothy because he wanted to throw people off, you know, so that they're looking for a female guru. He changed it to Jeff. He changed it to Puff, as in the magic dragon. He changed it to Raymond. He changed it. Finally, when he was run out of Austin, he ended up in Hawaii. He finally landed on his final name, which was Ray G, which literally means God King. So this guy who ended up just being a nice guy, meditation together, ended up being a monster. Like you know, when I was writing the book, I wrote the book because I left in 2006. I just wanted to leave. I didn't want to look back. I had been there for 22 years. And if you include Melilla from Florida, I would say 25 years I was involved in this. So I just wanted out. I'm gone. Boom. And that's a lot harder to do than you think. It's very complex. You don't get out.
Jose and I have both been married. We get it. It's very hard.
Yeah. Try and betray Trump. See how that works, right? So, you know, so it took me a long time to get out. But when I did, I just never wanted to look back until Holy Hell came out. Holy Hell came out in 2016, 10 years after I left. And we did not get, even though I'm in the film, we didn't get to see the final footage. We didn't get to see the footage until we're sitting in the audience at Sundance Film Festival. And we're seeing our life splayed out on the big screen. And now this is the story of Will, the filmmaker who was abused. Jaime was homosexual.
Of course.
So the females had a different experience. Most of these gurus end up having a lot of sexual improprieties and sexual abuse and whatever. But the females didn't, we weren't a part of that because he didn't like females. So we didn't know, and they were keeping this all a secret, and it was, of course they were. So when it all came tumbling out at Sundance Film Festival, I was like, this is Will Allen is the filmmaker, and I brought him to the Buddhafield. I brought him when he was 21 years old. He's 62 years old now. I'm like, I was devastated to see what happened to him. And I didn't know about it. And I knew after we left, I didn't know, but I didn't know the details of all these guys. So when that happened and when the film came out, that was in 2016. And I hate to say it, folks, but 2016, some other narcissist came onto the playground, and that is Donald Trump. And I recognized I'm getting a secondary PTSD here. I know this person. I know this person coming down this escalator. We're in trouble. So my point in writing the book was I wanted to take my life and my 25 years under the influence of a narcissistic sociopath and parallel it to today's cultural mania. And there is a huge cultural mania. So when I decided to write the book, Daniel knows me. I'm a researcher. That's basically what I am and do. So I needed to understand on so many levels, what the fuck was that? What was that 25 years? I'm not stupid and I'm not uneducated. How did that happen to me and my friends who were like also mostly, intelligent, sincere, beautiful seekers? How did this happen to us? So ask any questions you want. I know I'm rambling on, but don't ask me because I may tell you. But
go. This is gold. Go.
So I needed to understand on so many levels. I needed to understand what is the pathology we're dealing with here. What is the nature of a narcissist? And when I was writing the book, the original title was Duped. And yeah, because we were duped. I mean, he was writing and reading and memorizing scripts. He was using flashlights as parlor tricks. He was doing all these things. So
he was a con man.
Yes, we were, right? He was a con man, an absolute con man. But I realized that as I was writing it and exploring and seeing, and I did a lot of research on the definition of, there's narcissists, we're all got a little narcissism in us. If we want to be a comedian and get on stage, you have to have a little bit of narcissism to think that you're special enough to do that, right, Daniel? Or me teaching or whatever, right? So there's some healthy narcissism and there's malignant narcissism. And it's very different, right? And then there's malignant narcissistic sociopath. And they are the most dangerous. So I wanted to understand, what are we dealing with? Not only with Jaime, but what are we dealing with Donald Trump? So I did a lot. The first section of my book is all about me. How did I get there? What was the psychology in my life that made me seek community, seek something higher? What was going on with me? And a lot of things happened to me as a child: abusive father, abusive brother, violence, blah, blah, blah. So I wanted to paint that picture so that people understand, and also so that they trust me. I'm not here to point at you without three fingers pointing back at me, right? I want you to know me as a human being, and why do we find ourselves in these situations, and it's complex psychologically and otherwise. So the first part is about me and that journey up to meeting the guru. The second part is called the Buddhafield, which was a nickname. And people think, we were Buddha worshipers. No, we were not. We weren't Buddhists. We wanted to become the Buddha. And Buddha is not a name. It is a state of being, right? Mm-hmm. Christ is not a name. It is a state of being. So our journey was whatever it took to be. Remember, I started out being enamored with the saints. How is it that you could be tortured and transcend your physical and mental body, right? So that's what I wanted. I wanted that union with something way beyond this physical world. And most of the people in the Buddhafield did. That's why we nicknamed it the Buddhafield. It doesn't have, he was so paranoid after Waco. We had originally incorporated. How do I know? Because I drew up the incorporation papers, the documents. But he never wanted to, once Waco happened, he never wanted to be identified because his paranoia started setting in, and he was terrified that, we would, like the ATF is going to, start blowing our doors down. And I'm like, dude, now we're 150 hippies. Like, I don't think that's going to happen. But anyway,
which is interesting, right? Because I've read your book, like I said, and I know you talked about how you got there with, some of the things that happened in your childhood. But how does a person, right? Like give us a good example, if you can use yourself. How does a person fall into the trap of becoming kind of a subject to that malignant narcissist, right? Because we can use Donald Trump as an example, but I'm sure it can happen with a parent. It could happen with, I follow a YouTuber. It could happen with anybody. Yeah. But how does what criteria does that person have to have? And Jose, if you have a follow-up question, please ask. To fall into that, malignant narcissistic behavior, and to fall into victim to that, because I know for me, right, from my personal experience, I like to think that I'm a pretty smart guy, and God knows, I fall into some things every now and then where I'm like, that's not cool, and now I'm suffering the effects of that. So
yeah, that's a good question, Daniel, and people ask all the time, and I cannot obviously. Well. So I'll go on as I was saying. I originally called it duped because we were definitely duped. We were scammed, right? But then as I was doing this exploration, I changed it to, no, I'm going to change the title to the followers. because it's the followers that create the leader, not the other way around. It is the followers that feed that narcissism into a full-blown monster. And so the leader, usually narcissists are cowards, and they will never do their own bidding. You know, they'll huff and puff and get out there and, oh, they're bad and they're this and that. But they're the ones that aggravate your anger and then push you to do their bidding. Hitler could have never done what he did without his followers. So as a matter of fact, when I was writing this, I was doing some interviews with people, and I asked a friend of mine whose mother and her mother was a German Nazi. And I'm like, whoa, this is a fascinating person that I need to pick their brains. So I asked her, I said, what the fuck? What, what caused you to do that? And she said, you have to look at all of the things that were happening in Germany at the time. And all the things that were happening, World War I had happened. Germany got kicked in the teeth. The Treaty of Versailles came. Everybody stripped Germany of everything, right? And the people who had been convinced that World War II, they were going to be World War I, they were going to be victorious, right? Sent their boys, they got slaughtered, they lost their economy, they lost their money, they lost whatever. So they were in an extremely vulnerable position. So now this guy comes in, right? And he starts saying, all of Europe took your stuff away. The Treaty of Versailles, they didn't even allow you to be at the table, right? And they took all your land and they took all your money and they took everything. They're the bad guys. And we have an opportunity to be great, make Germany great again, right? And so from that political standpoint, she said, you don't understand, she said, we as Germans at the time some of us had been starving because of the war and wounded and whatever. And we had no resources anymore. So we were pissed, right? We were pissed. So then, and this is an interesting equation, which I made, there was a rumor going around. There was a rumor that there was a certain section of the population that were, listen to me, Satan-worshiping, baby-eating pedophiles. Sound familiar?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you know where that came from? It came from this was written by a Russian fascist in 1902. He wrote The Protocols of the Elder of Zion, the Elders of Zion.
I can't believe you're saying that right now, Radhia, because we recently spoke to a guy. We recently spoke to a Freemason, and he has a lot of deep connections, and he has very profound knowledge about the groups, either be Skull and Bones, either be the Masons themselves. And we talked about a character named from the 1800s named Albert Pike, and a letter that he wrote to President Mazzini. And it talks about that particular section of exactly what you're talking about right now. And it's amazing how you made that connection. And it's not a mistake.
It's called QAnon today, folks. And the worst part about it, and Daniel read my book. I have a lot of sarcasm in my book, right? Because you got to have a little humor in this. Otherwise, you just
absolutely
yourself,
no,
right?
Yeah. If not, you
right.
Twice.
I don't want to gun
twice
them out
by the CIA. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The CIA will just shoot you twice in the back and call it a suicide. It's fine.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want a gun to mouth experience in my book. At the end, I do, help you through it. But the reason why I bring it up is because, the QAnon phenomenon, they didn't even bother. They're plagiarizing out of the Protocols from the Elders of Zion. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion went into Mein Kampf. It was embedded in the literature of Mein Kampf. So what happened before World War II when Hitler wanted to get into the war and wanted to take all these bad people who took Germany away. He basically, there was a couple of Jews in Germany that wrote a letter to the Chancellor of England saying, we just want you to know that we're not supporting fascism and we are supporting democracy. Okay, so if that were on 4chan right now, it would have hit in a matter of seconds, right?
Oh, yeah.
But it
100%.
wasn't. So these leaflets and flyers went out and they correlated the protocols of the Elders of Zion with those nasty Jews who were pro-England and said they're the devils. They're the Satan-worshiping, baby-eating pedophiles that are anti-German. So you've got this section of people that are already vulnerable. They're already angry, and they're looking for something to be angry at, right? They're looking for the ultimate quintessential enemy. The Jews have been persecuted through, thousands of years, and here they are again because they're an easy mark, and that's what they wanted to do, right? So when you look at the condition of the people at that time, and you look at the condition of the people in America, and when you look at the MAGA population, these are not the intellectuals in our country. These are not the critical thinkers. These are the people that are pissed. They're pissed at the government because they've been told the government's doing all this stuff, right? And so they want a savior, right? So Donald Trump figures this out. Does he care about them? Oh, God, no. He shits in a gold toilet. He could care less. However, as a narcissistic sociopath like Jaime, we wanted enlightenment. Jaime promised it. With these people, they want a new nation. They want to stop being the underdog, right? So Trump comes in and he's going to promise that to you. Is he a fraud? 100%. 33,000 lies, provable lies in his little 4-year term. Yeah, no, he's an absolute. They're all of these narcissists. They come out of the same playbook. They have the same characteristics. Putin has the same. Maduro has the same. Bolsonaro has the same. They're all out of the same personality playbook. And so they're capturing a part of the population that is perceived to be hurting. And I say this not to say that they are or are not.
Yeah, because everything's anecdotal, right? What happens to one doesn't necessarily mean it happens to the masses.
Exactly. But then you've got the media. Then you've got the narrative.
Exactly.
The narrative comes in. And when you never thought that you were hurting, the narrative makes sure that you are suddenly.
And what do we call the news here, Danny? We call the news the broken
compass. Yeah,
the
news is the broken compass.
It is. And I don't care what side it is on.
No.
It's like Rupert Murdoch made the most profound statement in that court case that he had, that Fox News had against the voting machine company. He made the most profound statement. He said, and he said this in court, bold of him. He said, it's not about red or blue. It's about green.
It's always been about green.
It's
always
about
been about
green.
the money.
And it's interesting that we're tying this now to the networks, because while doing a lot of research, and this also kind of ties into not only what you've gone through as a young woman and going into that cult, and there's thousands of people that have gone through that experience, but going into the research, what I've noticed is there's a lot of cycles that repeat. Everything's on repeat, right?
Completely.
And what happened during that 60s and 70s era was something that was ingrained from 20 years prior, right?
Mhm.
And it was because of the societal success after World War II, the powers that be wanted, that peace and prosperity. But now that we were entering into a new decade, we needed to introduce some new lifestyles. Now we have, the civil liberties. We have the women's revolution. We have all this big societal movements during that time, and it was all cyclical, but it was also put into the people's minds through TV, right?
Yes.
So TV
Yes.
was a big factor in
Totally.
moving the masses in the whatever direction they wanted at that time, right? So
Totally.
so for example, and this goes back all the way back to JP Morgan and the Rockefellers, because at one point Morgan himself owned the only broadcasting network at that time, which was CBS. CBS was forced to break apart during the monopoly, because they got sued because of the monopoly, and ended up creating NBC and ABC anyway. So they all own all the major broadcast networks. Here's the thing. Programming, and people don't really think about when we talk about television. Television is telling you a vision. It is programming something into your mind.
Yes.
It's programmed. So it's not a coincidence that these networks during that time, during prime time, especially like during the 60s or Saturday and the weekends, all networks would be showing a cowboy show. Different actors, different stories, but they will all be showing the same show. So that goes the same, and it still happens to today, but it's on a grander scale because of social media.
Yeah.
So the point I'm getting to is the TV programming the masses at that point. Now we want this freedom, the sexual freedom. Women want their rights. We see a surge in LGBTQ rights. We see all this revolution happening during that time because of the programming. And you said it yourself also earlier, in the music, right? The Beatles, Sgt. Pepper's, album, where there's a whole lot of characters in the background, where we talk about Aleister Crowley, and we're talking about New Ageism. So when we're talking about the programming and shifting society, this is that where we're seeing that dawn of New Ageism, where a lot of people start going into it. So to bring it back to today, ever since 2016 and that shift after COVID in 2020, we are right back in that position as we speak. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. And I think, because like I said, in the time of Germany, they had to drop flyers. It took a long time to get the information. If that information was on 4chan today, it would be there in a matter of seconds. It would hit millions of people's minds in a matter of seconds. So now we're in an accelerated communication vortex, right? The original, I don't know if you've ever heard of Edward Bernays, but Edward Bernays was the nephew of Sigmund Freud. He was the son of Anna Freud, who was also a psychologist. And he was the first to write the treatise entitled Propaganda. Now, the irony of Edward Bernays is, and I say irony because it was Goebbels in Hitler, in the Nazi movement, who used Bernays' techniques, right? And the irony was Bernays was Jewish, right? So he sort of stabbed himself in the throat because he taught propaganda, right? So he was also the father of Madison Avenue. He moved to the United States and pretty much taught the world how to manipulate the population into consuming, right? So here we are in the original book. I have a second edition that's out now. In the original book, I was talking about the power of words and power of, narrative. It's so much more powerful than anything that we've got. And so these words, the powers that be, and these are the elites, and they are neither Republican nor Democrat. They are basically out for themselves, and whoever seems to be in power at the time, they will support. So what they're basically, the puppeteers, way above the politicians. They also, as you were saying, Jose, they control the media. They control the narrative. They control the messaging, and they own the media, right? And so basically I was writing about this, and I was writing about the power of words. And I don't know, you may be too young to remember, but back in the 90s, Bill Clinton got elected by one slogan, one phrase. It's the economy, stupid.
Yeah.
Remember that? Okay.
It's still
optimal,
a thing amongst Republican circles, by the way.
Yes, it is. What is the optimal word in that sentence? It's the economy, stupid. Stupid. Because nobody wants to be stupid.
No.
So that is deliberately planted in that phrase so that if you don't agree that the economy is the issue, you're stupid, right?
I mean, it makes sense, right? When you talk about the programming, you talk about the average person in America, and I think as a comedian, I think I have a really good gauge on the average person. Nobody really cares who's in office. It's all about, do I have money in my pocket and can I pay my bills? That's it. So doesn't matter if it's Trump, Biden, Obama, George Bush. If their pockets are full, they'll vote for the guy who made their pockets full. Right. So it is the economy, stupid.
Yeah, and that's, Lawrence Lessig, who is a great historian, he wrote a book that I like a lot called Republic Lost. And he talks about the fundamental corruption of the system, way beyond the politician. If a politician wants to play in the game, they have to play in the system. So they can come in with all of the idealistic viewpoints or dreams that they may have, but if they don't play the game, they will get bounced out, right? So it's the system that needs to change. So things like Citizens United and whatever fucked us, right? I mean, I'm sorry, but it did. That was the fall, as we see. That was the final straw. When we started, and there was a lot of things leading up to that, eliminating the fairness doctrine, so that now you could frickin' say anything. You could lie to the public, and there was no recourse to that. That was Ronald Reagan, right? But then as these games started to open up, there's two really good books that I like. One is called Democracy in Chains by Nancy MacLean. She talks about how this is actually the origin of the libertarian movement. And this is post-World War II. This is after Brown versus Board of Education. They suddenly did not want certain minorities to get the same education. So they got pissed off at that, and they set out on this mindset to change the education system and dumb down the education system in America. And we're about the dumbest, I think, on the planet at this point. They've done a very good job.
Very interesting that you say that, Radhia, because
I went to school in Florida, so I agree with that. So it's
we recently interviewed Donut Alex from the Donut Factory. Shout out to Donut. He has a really great documentary on his channel about the schooling system and how it parallels to the prison system. The layout, the breaks, just kind of like everything. I don't want to kind of give it all away, but you're absolutely right when it comes to that. But I also wanted to pick your brain because on two things here, because you mentioned that words have power, and and not only just like, oh, you offended me, but words, spelling, magic, your vibration, you're using your throat, things like that. You also come from a background where you are, you dove into your spirituality, so you are familiar with the concept of frequency and vibration and just things that are a little bit more on the occult side of things.
Very much so.
Now, when we are looking, and I like to use President Trump, ex-President Trump, as an example, the word MAGA, when I did some research on the word MAGA, it means magic. It's magician, all right? It's actually one of the highest degrees of sorcery in the Satanist church. So it's something. Yes, it's something very, very interesting. So the way also how President Trump won was using memes and the followers that he got from 4chan, right? Yeah. So when you look into the origin of memes goes back to ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. use called mimetic magic.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the internet, and having the internet, being able to spread something that goes viral, right? So
Yeah.
when you have something that goes viral, and he's using words that are
Right.
spelling, and you're
Right.
spell casting, right? So now we're
Right.
connecting two different worlds. But
Right.
I am convinced that these leaders have deep knowledge of some of these concepts. What
No doubt.
thought about
No
that?
doubt. You know, look, okay, so where McLean takes you is through the journey of the dumbing down of America. And this is the rise of the Libertarian Party, which my dear friends who do not know the origin of the Libertarian Party, they amuse themselves by thinking that they are libertarians. No, you're not, right? But the Libertarian Party, it's that book segued into another great book by Jane Mayer called Dark Money. So when you see who is behind this entire movement, right? You're looking at the Koch brothers, the Mercers, the Mellencamp, the DeVos family, the Olins, the Heritage family, the Heritage Foundation, all of this. These are all of the high elites that basically want no government because they don't want anybody to interfere with them raping and pillaging the planet for their profit. And so the interesting thing is that they couldn't get libertarian philosophy off the ground. Poor old Ayn Rand, she died on Social Security, and she sort of belly flopped into her own delusion, right? But a lot of people still, were carrying that false identity. And the problem is that they really couldn't get it going in the intellectual and political arena. So what happened was they created, which I love Jane Mayer's depiction. She refers to it as an astroturf. She talks about a fake grassroots movement. And this was the Tea Party. And so the Tea Party was completely contrived by the elite class. And what they did is they went out to they went out to those all rural, and they said, this redneck thing's working, right? So what are we going to call this? I know, let's call it the Tea Party. Why? Because the Tea Party, what does that represent to us? Revolution, right? Except for the irony is that most people, because we've lost the real origin story in history, in our history classes, they don't really understand what the Boston Tea Party was about. Yes, no taxation without representation. But no, it wasn't exactly like that. What it was about was the East Indian Tea Company, the largest tea company in the world, got tax exemption from King George. So there was no longer competition. So all the little mom and pop tea shops in the colonies couldn't compete with the East Indian tea because they were all taxed to the nines, right? So
Sounds familiar. Sounds familiar, Jose.
The Boston Tea Party is today's Amazon. It's today's Home Depot. It's today's big box stores, conglomerates that have wiped out the little guy, wiped out the quote unquote free enterprise. This idea that America is a free enterprise system is a complete sham. Yeah. And so what are these big stores and big conglomerates getting? Tax exemption. So we are actually in the very thing that we revolted against in 1776, right?
It's repetitive, it's cyclical.
Okay, so now let me ask you this. Like you stated some examples on the right side of politics, with the Tea Party, the Freedom Caucus, that are being used by big corporate manipulation. But what groups do you see on the left that are being used in the same way to further their agenda, kind of like the Bolsheviks versus the whatever? What's the opposite example? Because they're pinning us against each other.
And what is their agenda, Daniel, that you're talking about?
Well, I'm just talking about, just to be fair here. I'm not trying to
No, it's an important question because we do have a false equivalence. So I'm always fascinated when they say, well, the left is just as bad as the right. Well, okay, so
I'm not saying left is worse than the right.
Right.
But
well,
it's
no,
like,
they say it's just as bad, and I'm always when people want to make that equation, I'm open. Tell me what.
So like I think about some of the recent like political violence that's happened in the last 5 to 6 years with groups like Antifa and BLM and stuff like that. Now, when you look into like the money behind, for example, BLM, it isn't really ran by, black minorities. It's ran by big corporate money. I just want to know if you have any knowledge of, something on the inverse on the other side of the political spectrum, because if it's happening on the right, it has to be happening on the left, because God knows George Soros is known to play and gamble with his money to overthrow countries that don't suit his.
Poor old George
his
Soros, money. Man, he's like the one guy on the left, right? Really think of anybody else except for poor old Soros, as opposed to the Kochs, the Mercers, the Mellon family.
Oh, I'm not saying they're any better. I'm not saying they're any better.
But it also kind of goes back to also when, what Danny was just pointing out is, and you also, what you brought up earlier, those people, the puppet strings, the people that pull it doesn't matter what party it is. It doesn't matter if it's left or it's right, and that's exactly what they're doing. They are putting things to make us argue on purpose,
Exactly.
So this little interaction that you guys just had, they did it. They made you do that on purpose.
Like I'm not delusional. I'm sure Soros, the Koch brothers, Heritage Foundation, they all have dinner together. Come on now.
No. I'm not arguing with Daniel too.
Yeah.
I really do want to know. I really want to bring that out on the table and talk about it. But that may be a whole nother podcast we'll have to go through. But you're right, Jose. And I looked this up. Do you know that the elite powers that be, when Mitt Romney was running against Obama, they pretty much contributed equal amount to both camps. So what they were doing was betting on the come. They were betting on whoever was going to win this race, they've got the power over. And that is what Republic Lost is about, is the system, right? These politicians, on either side, if you want to play in the game, you have to be beholden to your sponsors.
Like Lockheed Martin,
Citizen United was all about, right?
Like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, all these companies that are part of the military-industrial complex.
Absolutely.
They'll sell the weapons to the bad guys and then tell the Americans, like, look at all what they're doing, and then they'll sell us the weapons to go fight them.
It's a wrestling show, guys. The world stage is one big wrestling show. If you have the military-industrial complex playing the main character and telling dudes like, "Oh, hate that person. He's attacking you." Oh,
absolutely.
No. It's orchestrated. These are people playing characters. So I think
they are.
Yeah,
they are. And Trump and Jaime Trump is a intellectual moron. I mean, he really is. But where he's good, and where Jaime was good, figuring out what you want and then being that. So, and in my book,
he's a showman.
In my book, I describe the difference between authoritarian figures in Europe and Asia as opposed to the new authoritarian figures here in the United States. And the interesting difference is that the authoritarians there, the Hitlers and the Mussolinis and the Putins and all of that, the populace was looking for a paternal figure. They were looking for a daddy figure to take care of all of their woes. The difference is here in the United States, they don't see Trump as a father figure. They see Trump as themselves. It is like a kid looking in a mirror and seeing a lion. So they identify with Trump as, yeah, that's me. That's the way I feel, because the more rude he is and the more angry he is and the more motherfucker and the more he's unabashed, that's the way they feel inside. So he is a reflection of them. And that's why they love him so much. It's very incestuous in a way, because he's not going to do it for them. He is them. That's why they love him so much, because he's giving them permission that our society was not giving you for a long time. No, you couldn't use the N word, and you couldn't use the K word, and you couldn't use, this. And society would spank you on the hand and say, that is not allowed. This population is getting frustrated with that. They don't want a daddy telling us that they can't do that. They want the right to do anything. Like yesterday in Nashville, the Nazis parading down the street, right? They want the right and the privilege to do that. And now they've got a leader who says they can. He was the president of the United States. You can't get any higher than that in this country. So that's why they love him.
You can.
Right?
You can become a Kardashian.
Of what they can't do. What'd you say, Daniel?
You can become a Kardashian. It's fine.
Yeah. Well, and so that's where money starts to really change the never before have we seen in this country the billionaires that we see today. Ever.
Oh, I know.
And so those become icons. Those become golden calves that we are worshiping.
Ooh.
Just like Trump was the golden calf. And now he's got his golden sneakers, right? Everything is gold. They even at the RNC.
There's some ugly sneakers, Jose. Pull them up. Pull up those sneakers, Jose. Those are some ugly sneakers.
Pull up, Danny. Pull them up. I'll bring it up on screen here in just a moment because I wanted to ask Radhia a question here. So recently we interviewed a researcher who dives into alchemy, and he talks about this mythological character called the homunculus, which is just a little person, a little tiny, person.
Right.
But what he's explaining is that the homunculus can also be manifested in, I guess, like in an energetical sense. For example, like even like movies, like movie characters, right? Like you can consider a movie character being a homunculus, right? So when you said that President Trump is a reflection of the people, right? As a whole, it almost means like President Trump was like a homunculus type, right, Danny?
It's exactly what
so
you're
like
saying.
Joe Biden, it was like at the time a homunculus of the masses. Yes. So was Jaime like a form of a homunculus now that we come at it that way?
Absolutely. Understand that after a while, like in the beginning, the whole thing was about the meditation techniques. That was what it was all about. And originally it was Maharaji who named those techniques the knowledge. So in the beginning, when I first knew Jaime, there was a very small band of us, very small. And the whole idea was these 4 techniques of meditation will lead you into the direct experience of God. So the light of God, the music of God, the word of God, the nectar of God, all inside you. And by doing these techniques, you connect to your source. Now, for me, I was initiated. Out of the 150 of us, there were probably 40 that were initiated. So I was one of the initiates, which it puts us in a rank. We definitely were in the higher rank, right? And all of these cults are ranked, whether it's a government cult or whatever. You've got your cabinet, you've got your Senate, you've got your underling, your governors, then you've got your people, right? So in this group, there's Jaime. He had his inner circle, then he had the initiates, then he had the aspirants, then he had the newbies. And so the newbies are like, they're not even allowed into most of these meetings. So the idea was, this is eventually. In the beginning, there was nothing. In the beginning, Jaime drove his own car.
It was like a church small group. It was like a church small group. It was like 5 or 10 people hanging out, talking about the word.
Exactly. Yeah, and we were all into the meditation techniques. So what happened was we all got initiated, and it happened about almost every year. There was about 4 total initiations that occurred. And we would lose after each initiation, we'd lose about 50% attrition rate. But the ones that stayed, the reason why we stayed was the goal was to live the life that served the highest, that also kept us diet-wise and kept us in a routine that when you're living in a community, it's a lot easier to do. It's a lot easier to stay clean in your diet. It's a lot easier to collectively meditate. And it's a lot easier when you've got a whole community doing it than trying to do it yourself. That's another reason why a lot of us didn't leave. It was because of the community. And we were, for the most part, you saw the film, beautiful. We were beautiful. And it was fun. And most of us were young and extremely healthy and extremely, we had our own jobs, but most of us, like me, practitioners, chiropractors, yoga teachers, massage therapists, dancers, cooks, artists, musicians, so we were you didn't see a lot of stockbrokers, let's put it that way.
What I find funny is because when I used to work with Radhia, she'd be like, look at me in 1965. And I'm like, ooh, what a hottie. What's up, Radhia? Let me get that dag.
And so just to kind of give you a compliment, Radhia, don't say that you're old, because you are like a fine wine of glass. Better with time, honey.
Yay. Thank you, dude. You're right.
All that time with a Hispanic rubbed off on you, because most white women age horribly, and you were aging like a Latina all day.
Exactly. And he was a flamboyant, gay, very gay Latino. So you can imagine how entertaining it was. It was entertaining, and it was fun, and it was funny most of the time. And we did wild things because a lot of our group were gay. A lot of our group were mostly gay or good. I mean, we started out in West Hollywood. Hello. So, a lot of us were gay, right? So, and we were young, and we were doing things, diet and lifestyle, that are trendy today. We were doing 40 years ago. So when you look at me, I'm 70, right?
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Yay, for sure.
Yay.
Yeah, right. And and there's pictures, and I think Daniel's probably seen my modeling portfolio. All of us, we were known as the beautiful people, right? And we were all young and really beautiful. Most of us were. And a lot of gay men, they're just beautiful, and they take care of their bodies. And so we were a tour de force. When we walked around Austin, we turned heads for sure. And no one could figure out who we were, because we were very clandestine, and we wouldn't tell them, oh, we were a movie group, or we were a, nature group, or whatever. We were trying to keep totally low key. But we definitely were a very beautiful, like I said, we were professional. Some of us were professional musicians and artists and dancers. And, so we were very cool. And so you didn't want to leave the group for a lot of reasons. So what happened was, in the very beginning, when we were all meditating and there was just a small group of us, it was all about the knowing, which he changed. It was the knowledge. He changed it. He changed the name of it to the knowing, so that the public would not equate it with Maharaji, because now his narcissism was starting to set in, and he's starting to feel good, So then he reads this book about a particular guru in India called Muktananda. And Muktananda was called the Shakti Guru. And Shakti Guru was, and you see it in the film, he puts his finger on your third eye and moves it like this, and you go into these gyrations, all mostly, I would say, group hysteria, right? But it's him disseminating his energy into you. Once he started that, he stopped giving the techniques of the knowing. And now, it used to be connect to God's love. Suddenly, it's connect to my love.
Wow.
And I'm like, wait, what? I didn't get the in-office memo on this. And I confronted him on this. And I went to him and said, what's this connect to my love stuff? And he said to me, and this is how he said it. I can do his voice so well. Well, Radhia, some people, not you, because he knew how to play me, but some people need a living God. They need a living master so that they can talk to and touch and feel. I am just being that for them.
que se vaya para el
Ah,
carajo con toda esa
so
mierda.
the,
Wow.
so the narcissism grew. And at the time, it was like, okay, that's reasonable. You know, and the reason why it was reasonable, Daniel, understand, we were reading about Yogananda and Ramana Maharshi and Ananda Moyama. They all had disciples. Jesus had disciples, right? Buddha had disciples. So this master-disciple relationship, we were all studying of all of these Indian masters that had ashrams and they had communities and they had the master-disciple relationship. So to me, at the time, it was like, okay, he feels that he is experiencing God directly. Who am I to say whether he is or not, right? They seem to be happy having something to serve. So this goes back to your original question, Daniel, 40 minutes ago, right? Something to serve. Now, understand in Eastern philosophy and whatever, the master-disciple relationship, the goal is to eliminate the ego. Because you cannot have union with God, with the one, with the Alpha Omega, and have a God and you. That's a duality. That's a two. So in order to have union with the one, you have to get rid of the you. So things that we were doing were practices to drop the ego. Well, isn't that damn convenient for a narcissist to use, right? So every time he would ask us to do something for him and we didn't want to do it. Oh, you are just in your mind. You are just in your ego. That is yourself, your desire. And you have to drop that in order to stay in alignment with God, right?
Oh my God. So you know, talking about that huge ego of Jaime and his godlike self.
Yeah, talking about ego.
Talk about the shrine that you helped build for him.
We did.
It's called the One World Theater.
Oh,
and
that.
Oh yeah, that, right?
Oh, that.
Talk about how that became such an Austin landmark. On top of that, how one, it has a comedy connection because of Joe Rogan, and talk about, you know, and talk about like what hand did you have in building that and how it became a historical marker, because that to me, that's like the crescendo of his narcissism. He built a freaking theater so he could perform.
Right. Well, okay. So yes, there it is. Now, you have to understand, and I'm really glad you're bringing this up, Daniel, because there's a lot of people in Austin that are still under the mystique of One World Theater. And there could not be, probably, I could name about a handful of people that, other than me, that could tell you the real story of One World Theater. Okay? And you see that building, you see that sort of Tuscany
it's a beautiful
look.
Building. I used to drive by it every day.
It is. You see that Tuscany look, and you see that sort of creamy color. And have you ever been inside of it?
I have not. I've only driven by it. It was closed to the public
it's
when it
dead now. It's dead. But inside, if you go in, the ceiling is all clouds, and the threshold around the entrance is ivy leaves, and then it's all in faux painting. So the exterior of that image you just showed and the interior I did by hand. Okay.
Wow.
That building, me and I had a team, but that building, okay, how it started was we did something, and you know, when I think about it, he really wanted absolute control of our time. So we all worked during the day, and different people had different jobs. I had a clinic, and other people, you know, were chefs or whatever. But at night, on our free time, there was no free time ever. So there was an event every night: Monday night class, and Tuesday night meditation, and Wednesday night dinner, and Thursday night satsang. Friday night, we all went to the movies. Seriously, in Hollywood, all 150 of us went to the movies. Saturday was a day off, but most people had service. and Sunday was an all-day outing, and then satsang at night. So every single day, there was an event of some sort happening. So we were renting. We were renting from dojos and renting from, yoga studios and stuff like that to have these functions. The only reason why we wanted to build One World is to have a place where we didn't have to rent, right? So Marley Porter, who was the architect, was one of the, he's brilliant, and he was one of the first sustainable living architects in Texas. And he was part of the Buddhafield. So we bought this property, and Marley was the architect for it. Now, the two outbuildings are straw bale, and the one you just saw, that theater, was actually recycled styrofoam. And the recycled styrofoam, which was mixed with concrete, made these big blocks. So we literally put that theater together like Logos, right? Or Legos, right? So we literally, all of us, one block at a time, right? The way it's done, they're hollow. And so once you set them up, then you pour concrete into them, and then you stucco the outside. So it's one of the first sustainable building architectures in Austin. And it was a jewel. So we built this thing, and the stories of this son of a bitch was he would come out and see his prize being built, and here we are like Egyptians, building this fucking pyramid, right? And when we were all in a line and, whatever, and the floor is incredible because he was a dancer. He was a part of the Oakland Ballet before he ever became a guru. So he was really into ballet. So we would do ballets in the past, but we would go to St. Stephen's and use their theater to do it. So the reason why he was building this was, one, for us to stop renting places. We wanted just a place to do our thing, right? And it wasn't really him building a shrine to himself. This was our activity center. It was such a problem renting because people were curious about what we're doing and why we're there till 3 o'clock in the morning screaming, weird shit like that. So we wanted a private place to scream, right? So we did a lot of, I don't know if you know who Osho is.
Yes.
Rajneesh.
They did the documentary of him on Wild Wild Country.
Yeah. So Jaime was with Rajneesh for a while. And he decided that he wanted to go off and do his own thing. But he certainly picked up a lot of the things that Rajneesh would do. So the activities, the kinds of exercises that we did were directly stolen. He never did anything that was his own stuff. It was always stolen from everybody. But this was mostly Osho's work. And we didn't get into, any of the sexual exercises that Osho did, but we did a lot of exploration. So when you see the movie Holy Hell, and you see us out in the forest and we're acting crazy, right? The problem with Will, the filmmaker, he can't tell a 30-year story in 100 minutes. So he can't explain to you what you're seeing. So we look like we're all doing these weird things. No, that particular scene, we were on an outing up in Arcata in California, and we were in the forest, in the redwood forest. And this was a particular exercise where he wanted us all to be forest animals. So it was sort of a method acting kind of thing. So, and the reason why is because he wanted us to be a squirrel or a wolf or an eagle or a chipmunk or whatever. And then afterwards, when we played it out and we became that and felt that, being a predator or a prey, right? Then we would talk about it afterwards. When are you a predator or a prey in your life? When do you do these kinds of behaviors? And how do you feel when you're that, So these exercises were explorative of amazing stuff, of our identities, of our egos, The whole goal was to get rid of the false identities and the false ego that we have built upon ourselves in our lives. So, we look crazy, I know, but there was a method to this madness, and it's actually called method acting. But we would do that. So in certain exercises at One World Theater or whatever, it would be, okay, everybody be the opposite sex. Okay? So the women would be men and the men would be, and we would walk around amongst each other. So what is your idea of the way, for me, Radhia, what is a man like to you, right? So play that out, act that out, and see how you respond to that in your life, right? So these were incredibly valuable in learning about ourselves and the mantle of identities that we take on. So while you can say, oh yeah, he's making us do all this shit. No, we were willing participants to explore ourselves, our ego, our identities, etc. But when you're a narcissist, isn't that really convenient? Because once he's learned all of that about you, then when you're acting like, whatever, he can say, see, you're being a prey right now. You're thinking you're being whatever. So it was perfect for him because he would learn about us. He made a living for God's sakes, he made a living as a hypnotherapist. Hello. So every week we would go in, literally pay him to hand him our psyche. We would hand him all of our fears. We would hand him all of the skeletons in our closet. So he recorded that and used that and memorized that. So there would be situations where if he did something odd and I would go in and confront him about it, he'd go, Radhia, you are just projecting your father on me. That kind of stuff, right?
Gaslighting.
And he was right in that sense, So it was like, yeah, it made sense, right? So
dude, can I find this dude? I want to beat his ass right now.
Right.
I'm sorry, I don't condone violence. But
I can tell you exactly. I can give you his address if you want it.
All right, can I? How old is he now? Like 70? I don't want to hit an old man, but still.
It's crazy because there's a lot of parallels of what you're describing about this. We're not even going to name him. We're just going to have this character. All right, we're just going to call him a character because I don't want to give it any more power to this guy. But this character reminds me a lot, if it kind of going back into like occult practices, stuff that Aleister Crowley was doing and stuff that
he was a student. He was a student of Crowley's.
Wow. So
in Hollywood,
because everything that he was just saying, and don't ask me how I know this, because again, this is just me doing research. When Thelema was created by Aleister Crowley, that was one of the main things, is to be a god. You are a star, right? So the for the very fact that Radhia, he's saying that, oh, Radhia, no, but it's be okay for people to have a living God aquí en planeta Tierra.
Yeah.
No, that is some Aleister Crowley and shit right there.
He was a student of Aleister Crowley's in Hollywood.
I was not expecting this, Jose.
I'm not kidding
Holy shit.
We started to do a real deep dive on him once everyone got out and we were like, what the fuck was that? We started to do, he was in Rosemary's Baby, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay. He was so bad as an actor, they made him a role as an extra. But the reason why he was in that group that was Charlie Manson and all these other guys that were sort of hanging around with Polanski and all these other people was because they were all involved with Crowley's kind of thinking and his techniques, right? So that's how he got into the movies. And so he was a student of his. And he was a student of, of these kinds of techniques. And by the way, so is Donald Trump, by the way.
I'm not denying any of
knows
it.
linguistic, whatchamacallit, I want to say no, he knows. Okay, my brain just went out of touch, but he learned all of these techniques, and this is what he does to his base.
Wow.
And when you hear the things that come out of his mouth and the way they come out, we go back to words again,
gestures.
Right?
It's magic.
He's creating their mindset.
Wow.
So,
and he is. You know?
Dude,
so,
I did not think that this episode was gonna end up the way that it. Yeah, this is fucking
ridiculous.
Great because I mean not great because it's terrible what happened.
Well,
right?
it's kind of scary, but you know.
We
were just having this conversation with what that means because we were talking about Aleister Crowley, and then that kind of led me into doing more research. And I watched this show a few months ago called Strange Angel, which is like based on loosely on the life of Jack Parsons, who was the father of modern day rocketry. And this guy was practicing some crazy ass shit. And he was Aleister Crowley's #1 disciple. And come to find out that Aleister Crowley has so much influence in Hollywood and in music. Totally. That's what led me to ask you about that, which is
that's insane. Where I was like in the core. I was in the heart of that, and all of that was around me.
Oh my
God. It was around me. Now I did not find myself in those circles, except for I ended up with Jaime. But
that was all around me in my life as a young woman. You were a degree or two away from him. It's ridiculous because, don't get me wrong. I first of all, thank you so much for doing this interview. But more than anything, it's like you lived in that era and you felt the ripples of an Aleister Crowley influence directly to the person who influenced you.
Right.
And Crowley's been dead for decades at this point because he died in the early 19th century. So for him to have that much influence into the 70s and even until today, when you look at music, hip hop, it's filled with Aleister Crowley symbolism.
Right. Well, Jose, in my first chapter, I talk about, this Trump phenomenon that we're seeing today. This schism in this country started then. It started in the 60s and it started to blossom, and it's kind of a weird thing because in the beginning, in the 60s, which was really in the middle of the Vietnam War, and it was in the middle of my age, was going, there's something rotten in Denmark. There's something really off here. And we were no longer enchanted with the war, right? We saw that we had been lied to. So there was a huge upheaval in my generation of hell no, right? Then, I was there in Los Angeles in the Watts riots. I was there with these movements, huge movements, where it started to, it was beautiful in the beginning. And you started to see how civil rights was right. This is right. Oh, wait a minute, you're right. We didn't grow up where, like in the South here, which is such a cultural shock to me when we moved here. But we didn't have so much Jim Crow in Los Angeles at that time. There was, but it wasn't so blatant as it is in the South. But when this movement started happening, I happened to have been best friends with a woman whose mother was a playwright and her best friend was Angela Davis, right? And so she was very wealthy, the woman. She was a playwright. She lived in the old Beatles house. And the old Beatles house was across the street from Sonny and Cher and next door to Mick Jagger, right? In Bel Air. And every weekend, pretty much, I spent my life at her house because it was so much cooler than mine, right? So
why not? You're young, you're in West Hollywood. Go, why not?
Right?
Hey,
So
nothing but a little
the
nose candy.
thespians and the writers and the musicians and the activists and whatever, they were all coming to this house that I was growing up in, right? And so I was getting a firsthand of the pulse of this movements that were happening. For God's sakes, it was like, whoa, this is like amazing. And I was very young, so my young mind was exposed to this activist movement and to this, this is right and that ain't, And so when that was in the 60s, and that was when music was, I was at Jimi Hendrix on Purple Haze, right? I was at Janis Joplin, right? Opened by Santana. I went to an anti-Vietnam thing, and I'm sitting or taking a break in the basketball thing, and they're sitting in the corner as a grand piano, and this blonde who was playing the piano and just singing, and it was Joni Mitchell. I was in the heart of it. I was friends in the jazz movement because my adopted sister was a musician. She turned me on when I was 16, took me to all these jazz clubs everywhere, So I had such a mixture of culture, and it was awesome. It really was. But the point is that was a beautiful time. And then the 70s came. And when the 70s came, and I say this in my book in the early part, things began to be monetized. Sexuality became monetized. Drugs became monetized. The whole cultural movement was now becoming monetized. And it was monetized by people like Hugh Hefner and people like Hollywood and people like, the original musicians were not making the amount of money that they started making in the 70s. That's when they went from having a purity of heart to like, fuck, you can do this? How much are you going to pay me? Right? And so that's when things really started to corrode and corrupt, is in the 70s. So the good drugs that we were all doing, the good psychedelics and whatever, started turning into cocaine and heroin and smack and crack, and all this stuff started happening. And I was in the middle of that metamorphosis of what might have been beautiful to, like, when we had decided, and I have a whole chapter called Birds of a Feather about narcissists and their sexual behavior, right? But when you've got the Playboy Mansion right there, few blocks away, and you've got Playboy clubs everywhere, and you've got Playboy and Hustler magazine, and now pornography has now come on. So the free love movement now is monetized into pornography. So the first big movie was Deep Throat.
Oh yeah.
Right. And so now, once Deep Throat was allowed, boom, it started to become an industry. So things started to really become perverted. And the music started to become perverted, and it started to become more angry and more anarchy, So the rock and roll of the early, the mid 60s was beautiful. And then it started to become darker and darker and angrier and spikier. And, so if you didn't have a, razor blade in your ear and a diaper pin in your nose, you were not cool if you didn't like to smash people, right? And let out your anger and your violence and whatever. So we saw this cultural shift. Well, when that happened, then you've got the other side of the culture. And the other side of the culture is the evangelicals. The other side of the culture is the Rush Limbaughs. And now, so while we're listening to the rock and roll and whatever, they're listening to talk radio. And so talk radio now has become huge in certain factors. So the schism starts to happen. And now we are looking scarier by the day. We've gone from hippies and flower power to, mosh pits, right? And so we have that, our culture had started to become angry against the establishment, angry against the masses, angry against the Leave It to Beaver, right? And we were not going to be that, okay?
I think
so
a great
the Leave It
example of
to
that
Beaver,
is
to make
comparing
America
Woodstocks.
great again, is what they're talking about. They
I think
want a Leave It to Beaver. They want June Cleaver with her little apron, barefoot and pregnant in the house, while the white Christian male is top of the heap, right? And so as this started to morph, that sector of the population went, hey, wait a minute. That's what they grabbed onto. That's what the elite grabbed onto. So they grabbed onto two things. They grabbed onto the redneck one, the rural, who was still living in that, still going to church every Sunday and doing that. And they grabbed onto the evangelical. And I do have I have a chapter in my book called The Mother of All Cults. And why they will not, why the media, they've brought him in, Jeff Charlotte. He did a documentary called The Family, and it's on Netflix. Talk about some scary shit, right? So the evangelical cult, and this was a sect of the Christian population. So once I started doing my research and whatever, I read Jeff Charlotte's book. Jeff Charlotte was in the family, and he got out of the family and wrote about it. So he wrote two books. He wrote The Family, and he wrote C Street. And they did a documentary. Not a great documentary, but okay, it's a docuseries. It's called The Family. People need to see it. If they're not going to read the books, the books are a bit dry, but they tell the entire history of the evangelical movement in the United States. And 80 years they have been in this movement. 80 years they have been stealth. They have been quietly trying to manipulate their way into the minds of a certain factor of the population. And their belief is not Christian. Believe it or not, it's not the Lamb of God that we all know and love. It's not the Jesus, not the Lamb of God, but they worship the wolf. Okay. So, and I'm not kidding, they do worship the wolf. The wolf in sheep's clothing, the wolf is the one that is important. That is the power. And that's what they think we need in this country. That's what Donald Trump has become. So the evangelicals see Donald Trump as King David. Now, King David, as you remember, with his little improprietors with Bathsheba, and he had her husband killed, and he was
King David was the fuckboy of his era. Okay,
I've heard some comparisons to King Cyrus as well.
Yeah, well, it's King David in the evangelicals' book and their Bible. What they did was they took the Bible, ripped that page out, and said, oh, this is a good one. And they made their own Bible. And their own Bible is this small little black book, and it doesn't say Holy Bible, it says Jesus. That's it. And in it, they have extracted out of the Bible everything that they need to show you what Jesus wants. And Jesus did not come as the Prince of Peace. He came with a sword, and he is here to annihilate the wicked, right?
Okay. Spitting facts, girl. Yeah.
So basically their belief is that as long as you are successful, then it's Jesus ordained. And to them, Jesus plus nothing. So everything that they do is on the table. That means genocide, murder, lying, everything you can manage to get where you want. If you're successful, it means Jesus ordained it.
Nope.
So when people say, doctrine. I don't get it.
Yeah.
How can these maggots, these evangelicals, how can they think that they're Christian, right?
And that's a really big problem
because that is false doctrine.
Yeah.
Roddy, you know me, that I am a Christian to my core. I believe in the finished work of Jesus Christ. And you cannot have the living Christ as depicted in the New Testament without the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
right? You can't have that. And if anybody who preaches that, saying that Jesus was this and he's that, is according to the Bible, is he going to come back on a white horse as a conquering king? Yes, but that's in the future. But he came back as the lamb for a sacrifice. And if we're
Right.
if we're going to say that about Yahweh, about Yeshua, if we're going to
Yeah.
say those things, we need to speak in true doctrine. We can't speak
Exactly.
in a negative false doctrine that just
Of course.
it's apologetics at its finest. And as a Christian who I am an active member of my church, and I'm very picky in where I go to worship, because I do know that there are people in this world that take the word and twist it for their own. I've been part of a mega church in Texas. I've been part of a mega church in Texas where I've seen the word being used as a weapon instead of a redeeming factor for humanity. So it sucks when, because I've seen that documentary that you're talking about, where it's like these powerful, people in Washington, in the swamp or whatever the heck you want to call it, that they use it for this. And it's not just Republicans, it's Democrats too. They're all part of these small groups.
It is.
It is. And it's like, it's these politicians that want power, and they want to use the Christian, value system that most Americans have, right? The Judeo-Christian value system that we have against us, which is at the most evil thing I think we can ever do.
Well, beware of the wolf in sheep's clothing, right? It's prophesized, and they are the very thing that the prophecy says. They are the wolf in sheep's clothing, the righteous. They are not the righteous. They are the. I don't subscribe to my feeling on religion, and I don't like to use words like evil because it has the religious connotation, etc. But there are energies. You talked earlier, Jose, about frequencies. Okay, there is a certain frequency that is a real dark frequency, and and it's there. And I would say the Antichrist is the anti-Christ teaching. It is the anti what we understand of the Christ teaching. And so it's, yes. And so I am not on a religious, because there's so much more behind that I have kind of left in my life. But at the last few chapters, Jose, in my book, people always go, okay, you took us down this very wild road. Now what, Radhia? Where are you? Do you believe in God? Number one, every I did a lot of Q&As for that film. And typically the audience would say two things. Do you still believe in God? And why didn't you leave? So I attempt to answer those two questions at the end of the book. And what is God to me? Because I don't like to use that word because it has so many religious connotations. It's like, whose God are you talking about? What kind of concept of God do you have? So I talk about that, and people, they may read my book in the very beginning and go, oh, well, she's an atheist. Not at all. An atheist is another identity. It's another group to belong.
Exactly.
It's another, this is who I am. And that is false to me as well. So do I believe in that higher consciousness? Yes. So when you ask me, what is God to me? It is that Alpha Omega consciousness. It is all things,
it's all thing. It's no thing. Yeah,
exactly. It is. And it is the frequency that holds this all together. And then beyond that, right? So, so I get into that in the last.
I love that. I absolutely love that, Radhia. And I want to say, first of all, even on behalf of Danny, that we are filled with so much gratitude right now for you coming onto the show.
My job's still on the floor.
dropping your life story and just really going. And I feel like we only scratched the surface with you, Radhia. And so we're definitely going to have to bring you back for
Well,
another
many
show.
years, guys. That's true.
Radhia, where can the people find you on socials?
So if you want to go to my website, it's easy, radhiagleis.com. Boom. If you want to contact me, it's Radhia Gleis at Gmail. Or I'm Radhia Gleis on Facebook and on Instagram. And I've got a lot of videos on YouTube, but they're mostly about my practice. So if you look, scroll up a little bit, keep going, up. No, other way. Go up to the top. Top of the okay, so see that menu there? So in the menu, you'll see two things. You'll see health resources and author resources. Okay, so in the health resources, that's all about what I do in my practice. In the media resources, those are my other interviews. Those are articles that I've written all about, the cult and all about that. So they're all in one thing. I know it's confusing, but it's my brand that I'm trying to think. It's Radhia Gleis, But if you want to contact me, you can contact me through Facebook, through Instagram. Look for my name. My professional Facebook is Radhia Gleis CCN. If you want some of my services. But check it out. And
we'll make sure to link it all into the description, guys. So maybe for the audience on YouTube, everything will be available there. So make sure you check out Radhia Gleis and check out her book, The Followers. Great stuff. I am so happy that you were able to come onto the show. Danny, is there anything you wanna finish up here before we head out?
No, other than I love you, Radhia. We'll have you back on soon. We'll probably pick some major event to invite you back on and talk about. But honestly, I love you so much. Well,
this was so fun. And guys, if you're listening, I've known Daniel now for a few years, and he looks great. I barely even recognize him. He looks fabulous. I know how he got there is not the best way, but you look so great. What a handsome dude you are.
Thank you.
And you are too, Jose. But
it runs in the family.
I've known his journey, right? So I'm so happy to be here. And guys, Daniel is so funny. He's such a good comedian. So when he gets back into that, you gotta go to his shows.
Yeah,
too.
book me. If you're listening and you're a comedy booker. Hey, book me. I'll come do some comedy for you.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Thank you guys so much for listening. This has been Cultura Truth Project with Jose G and Danny G, with our invited guest Radhia Gleis. Thank you guys so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
That's right, mi gente. Make sure to follow us on YouTube and on Rumble at Cultura Truth Project. Follow the show Gonzalez Media TV, Facebook, on Instagram Gonzalez Media TV. And subscribe to the podcast on all major platforms: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, and leave us a 5-star review. That's it. We'll see you guys in the next episode.